Well, it's not my fault you press play. Welcome to Monstrosities Mon Amour, the show where we leave an unsuspecting building its best ever review on TripAdvisor. I'm John Grindrod, which, backwards, is Nodge Dordnerg, which makes me sound like a space pirate who paints terrible portraits in a Douglas Adams novel. It was lovely to see artist and writer Dan Thompson today. Well, until he put a sack over my head and lobbed me in the back of his car. I'm guessing an Austin Maxi. I see a pattern. So, Dan, that was a bit of a hairy drive, considering you can't drive.
Yeah, I can't drive, but, it's an Austin Maxi. You can't go too far wrong with one of them, can you?
Exactly.
Really?
Just get the elastic band lined up and you're away. But where are we? Where have we ended up?
We're on Margate seafront. It's inevitable that I was going to bring you to Margate, and we're parked up in this little bay just behind Turner Contemporary down on the seafront. And obviously people are going to expect me to want to talk about Turner Contemporary or about Arlington House, the famous bookend at the other end of the seafront. But we're not. I'm going to turn you around to face this little building here instead.
Well, this is quite a cutie, a bit hidden away here, isn't it? What are we looking at?
We're looking at a little circular building. It's at the back of Droit House, which is the historic building with the clock tower at the end of the harbour arm. We're looking at this little circular building. It's clad in black wooden laminate, with these little concrete embrasures, these little concrete windows down the side, and this little, if we go around here, you can see this little bit that connects it to Droit House at the front. And Droit House, the building at the front, is now the Visitor Information Centre, and this is now just a room that they use for meetings out the back. But it wasn't that. This is the original Turner Centre from 2002.
No, it's one of those buildings that is quite easy to miss when you're here, isn't it? Because Margate Seafront has got, as you say, quite a lot of superstar buildings, not least Droit House itself, which is a lovely little Oxo Tower-ish cutie sitting on the seafront here, being a kind of, adorable seafront monument. And then we've got Turner Contemporary next door. We've got Dreamland just down the road, and then Arlington House towering over the town. So we've got all of these massive buildings and imposing structures. But this is quite a quiet building, and just really unusual building actually for the seafront anywhere, really. I guess the thing it sort of reminds me most of is a sort of World War II pillbox structure, like a little battlement.
It feels fortified. It feels like it's a solid little fortified building right here. It's interesting because it also echoes at the other end of the seafront. When Russell Diplock built Arlington House, he gifted the town a new visitor information centre, and that was a circular building outside Margate Station. And that was a real kind of Festival of Britain circular building, clad in blue and yellow at different times. So there's a history of kind of circular buildings here, and this is the latest.
Lovely, a sort of life ring. How did this building come about? Because obviously we've got, you said that this is the first Turner gallery, but the Turner Gallery we're all really familiar with is only a few yards away, and also was only built not very long after this one. So how did this building come about?
So Turner, the story of Turner coming to Margate and this building being here is really fascinating. John Crofts was the chair of Margate Civic Society back in the 90s, and he could see that Margate was in real trouble at that point. And Margate's problems go back a long way. It's not that everyone went to Benidorm on holiday. It's that everyone went anywhere that was better than Margate on holiday, and everywhere was better than Margate.
Way harsh.
Well, it is, but at the end of the Second World War, other seaside towns decided to invest in infrastructure, to build a new theatre, to refurbish the pier, to build something new to reopen after the Second World War. Margate had been heavily bombed. 60 or 70% of the buildings in Margate had been damaged. The population in Margate fell. 1939, there's 40,000 people. 1940, there's 4,000 people left in the town.
Whoa.
And everything is boarded up and derelict. And it stays that way for most of the Second World War. And then in 1945, Margate decides to reopen as if nothing's happened. And of course, it reopens with damp, mouldy hotels that have been boarded up with smashed windows. It's all a bit shit. And Margate continues like that and doesn't really invest in any new buildings at all. So it's not that people went to Benidorm, it's that Margate didn't look after itself at all. And then in the 90s, John Croft at the Civic Society says we need to find a new way to look at this place and a new way to attract tourists. And he makes the connection with Turner. And Turner had come here first as a boy, had come to school in Margate, and then came back later in life because he was in love with Mrs. Booth, who had a guest house, which is right behind us where Turner Contemporary is, with Mrs. Booth's guest house. So John Croft makes this connection with Turner and starts talking about the idea of, let's have a different story, let's have a different narrative for Margate, and that's that Turner was here and it's beautiful and the landscape's interesting. And by the late 90s, John Croft has got that policy adopted. Kent County Council are talking about celebrating Turner's connection to Margate. And in 2002, Terry Farrell has drawn up a waterfront master plan, Margate waterfront master plan.
He was very good at a waterfront master plan, Terry Farrell. More or less anywhere you go that's got a waterfront, Terry Farrell will have done a master plan for it.
But it's brilliant because it's this first time when people turn around and look out to sea from Margate again. And up until then, a lot of Margate stuff was Dreamland and it was inward looking. And suddenly here's this kind of, forget the buckets and spades and the plastic stuff and look out to sea, and that's where the beauty is. And Terry Farrell identifies that if you're going to have a Turner Centre, as it's initially called, it should be here on the rendezvous site where Mrs. Booth's house was, where the old pier used to be before that was demolished and lost, but visible from Margate Station. So you can walk out of Margate Station, designed by Maxwell Fry. You can walk out of Margate Station, look across and see exactly where you're going. And aware that they need to build momentum behind this and get people interested, they decide not to go straight for the big gallery, but to refurbish Droit House, that at that point was empty, refurbish Droit House and build this little addition to it at the back that connects to it as a statement of, we're going to do something different, this is a new thing. And it opened in 2002 for Architecture Week. And it's pretty much the first investment in tourism infrastructure in Margate post 1945.
Amazing. I mean, that's sort of incredible, isn't it? When you think of a seaside town, you think of like the constant, almost disposable nature of reinvention and architecture, that people constantly recladding or repurposing or restructuring buildings, gaudy new facades going up, coming down, depending on the fashion. It's sort of extraordinary that Margate is still trapped in this Patrick Hamilton dreary interwar stasis and hasn't moved on and hasn't embraced it. So this really is a huge statement. I mean, I guess we've had other sorts of building going on, haven't we? Like Arlington House. We've had other sorts of construction in that period, but as you say, not tourist.
Arlington House is the only one. I mean, really, Arlington House is it. And Arlington House is Russell Diplock. It comes up in 63, opens in 63, 64. And for the first year of its life, it only has one tenant, only has one resident in the entire tower block who's living in there all by himself. And it's a service tower block. You've got, there's a porter in the office downstairs, presumably there on 24-hour service for this one chap who lives there.
Incredible. I mean, how that wasn't a J.G. Ballard novel, no one knows.
Absolutely. So there's nothing else. There's a new civic centre built for the council offices, but that's it. That's the only other new build in that entire period. And you spoke about disposable seaside architecture, and that's absolutely it. The trouble is that Margate got the disposable bit and threw lots of things away, but forgot you have to replace them with something new. So you see this decline from sort of the 1960s onwards. You see Margate lose building after building after building without putting anything new in their place.
And I guess a really interesting thing about this drum is that it's not your sort of typical seaside, quite gaudy attraction, is it? It's not a sort of making a huge statement on the front. In fact, it's sort of nestled behind the building that's on the front. As you say, it's clad in black, so it's quite stealthy. So it's the opposite, really, of the sort of seaside architecture that we might have expected in the post-war period. It's sort of the opposite of the stuff that was being built then. Why do you think it's ended up as being this quite modest structure? Why wasn't there more of a dramatic intervention?
The plan at that point wasn't really to build a new gallery. I mean, the initial plan was to use a building like the Sea Bathing Hospital, which is the Georgian building on the other side of town, where Margate started. That was the first hospital that attracted people down for sea bathing and saltwater cures and all of that stuff. And John Croft very much imagined using a building like that to house a Turner collection. And it would be a collection of Turner paintings that came down here and stayed here. That was sort of the idea. And I think this building was trying not to scare people too much, trying not to be too radical. But it's a beautiful, bold piece of architecture in its simplicity, in how humble it is.
Yeah, it's a really lovely thing, isn't it? And it's incredibly subtle. It's interesting. So it's Terry Farrell, isn't it? Also designed this structure. Is that right?
Yeah, he did. This is an unsung Terry Farrell building.
I mean, unsung is absolutely right. It's one of those buildings where it's very hard to find out loads of information about it. It's even on the Terry Farrell's own site, it's overlooked the actual building. The master plan is sort of talked about, but the building itself, not so much. And it's quite curious that it has remained a sort of slightly unsung building, considering how lovely it is, and also what a pioneering building, for the town. It's a really important building, isn't it?
Absolutely. Before kidnapping you in my maxi, I popped into the Visitor Information Centre and asked them about the building. They don't know. The people who are now occupying this really important building said to me, "Well, we only moved in 2011 or whenever. We don't know what it was or how it was built." And I think that's incredible that we've got this absolute gem, and it sits there next to the Chipperfield building behind it, which is they're absolute opposites. You've got this dark round building next to this huge blocky pale white glass clad building. The two are so opposite, but they sit there beautifully together.
The gallery is so angular, and this extension is so sort of smooth and almost sort of secretive, isn't it? They do sit there as total opposites next to one another and really complement one another. It's a really brilliant bit of placemaking, I guess.
It's an underused building now. It's been the inside has been knocked about a bit and turned into a meeting room for the council to use and that kind of stuff.
It's a very, very posh meeting room.
Yeah. But you go into it now, you've got no sense of the building. You've got no sense of what it is. It used to be used much more as an exhibition space. And I remember seeing a piece of work by Gudrun Haraldsdottir in here that was just this beautiful installation. And she'd created a series of kind of hanging drapes and things around the space, around this circular space. And you walked in, and as you walked in, you were filmed. And you filmed was then played back amongst old nostalgic footage of old Margate, archive footage and things of old Margate. So you were placed into this history of Margate as a seaside town. And I will never forget that experience in that building because it was such a beautiful space to do work like that. And I think it's a building that at some point people are going to start going, hold on, this should still be a gallery space. We should still be using this. It shouldn't just be a meeting room. It's owned by Kent County Council. They're the landlords. They developed it. And they're also the owners of Turner Contemporary. They're the landlords of the Turner Gallery site. So they're both in Kent County Council ownership. And it'd be lovely to see this building recognised and brought back into that kind of gallery seafront use rather than just being a little bland meeting room.
Sort of amazing that it's just a Terry Farrell building, because Farrell, I guess, is known for really distinct periods in his work. In the sort of 70s and early 80s, he was really known as sort of housing architect who was really interested in vernacular details and the way people sort of changed and adapted their own houses with their own personalities. And then he becomes sort of in the late 80s and early 90s, this architect of these huge sort of postmodern, exciting buildings like the building above Charing Cross Station and MI6 and, all of those buildings. Falls out of favour massively, sort of derided by the architecture establishment, sort of goes off around the world and designs lots of buildings in other countries and then comes back and by the millennium is designing, again, in a completely different style, again, a completely different sort of architecture, buildings like the Deep. But the thing that he seems to be really, really interested in is master planning at this point. This idea of you're going to reimagine a place and you're going to connect things up. And I guess that's the the lasting legacy, really, of his work in Margate is not just this building, but the way he's then sort of engineers the whole seafront, and sort of reimagines it and tries to reconnect things.
Absolutely. I think he reshaped Margate in lots of ways. And there's bits of that never happened. There's bits that didn't get done that are still kind of rippling through the years. But most importantly, he gave Margate a new way of talking about itself. He gave it a new language to describe itself as a place. And that was, we sort of joke about if we're being a waterfront, but it was that idea of, up until then, you stayed in a guest house down a side road. You went to Dreamland that doesn't look out over the sea, that doesn't connect to the sea. You went to the Winter Gardens. The Winter Gardens had boarded up all their windows that faced out over the sea because they were prone to getting smashed by pebbles in stormy weather. So you could go to the Winter Gardens and ignore the fact that it's right on the beach and looks out over the sea. The pier had gone. The pier had fallen down in a storm. The sun deck, that was the sort of stumpy pier at the station end of the beach, had also been lost to developers. They demolished that. So you really had lost that connection with the sea. And, we moved to Margate. I first worked in Margate in 2004, moved here in 2013. And even then, people weren't really using the beach. The beach was kind of there, and you knew that there were buckets and spades, and there's Kiddy's Corner with some bouncy castles and a roundabout. There's a bit of stuff on the beach, but it wasn't really used. And when you look out at the beach now, and the beach is packed, and the beach is not only packed with people coming down for the day, but you've got the other end of the beach where the people who've moved from London into Cliftonville, they hang out at Walpole Bay, the tidal bathing pool out that end. They sea swim. I go wild sea swimming. No, you just go swimming. It's the same thing. Whether you're swimming on main sand or wild sea swimming at Walpole Bay, you're swimming in the sea. But that whole focus back on the beach and the coastline and the sea is that's the transformation he's made. And the fact that when I first came here, everyone you spoke to who was living here already, local, they were so down on the place. They'd talk it down. They'd tell you how bad it was. And even the people now who don't like the gentrification that's happened, who swear blind that they never go into Turner, that they hate all this modern art stuff, they can tell you the quote from Turner about the loveliest skies in all Europe. They've internalized that new voice, that new way of talking about Margate, even if they still refuse to go in the gallery itself.
Obviously, there were loads of critiques of the sort of gentrification of Margate.
Margate is all gentrification. If we strip away the gentrification in Margate, you have a tiny little fishing village huddled around the harbour, and the fishing at this end of the Thames has pretty much dried up. So you've got a tiny little fishing village with poor catches and some not great farming agricultural land behind it. Margate has never had any industry other than taking money off Londoners. That's what Margate has done since about 1750, at least. And it has no other industry. This isn't a place that had a big port, that had a shipbuilding industry, that had some other industry just behind the coast. That there was nothing else. All it has done is built houses, originally in the Georgian style, to fleece money out of Londoners and get them to come down for the season. All those houses were built to attract the actual gentry. That was the purpose of them. So Margate's a really hard place to have that conversation because it has nothing else except gentrification as an industry.
And that very much ties into the legacy of Turner, doesn't it? And Turner's relationship with the place is that he goes there because of where it is. But, not only because, he's in love, but because he's fascinated with that landscape. And there is something very interesting, I think, about the subtlety of the building that you've chosen, and that sort of cloudy response that you get from Turner in these seascapes, this light and sort of murk and the sort of density of the atmosphere of the place is the thing that you really focus on rather than the detail.
I would love to talk to Terry Farrell and find out why here, because you could have put it 5 metres in either direction. You could have put it 5 metres to the side and it would be higher up looking out over the sea on the end of the harbour arm. You could have built it at the end of the harbour arm looking out back over the town. You could have built it slightly further around the bay where the little Manning's seafood stall is. You could have built it there at the end of the harbour, looking out across the harbour. But it didn't. He built it here, slightly low down. You've got sort of steps up to the seawall and the front, so we're below the top level of the seawall. There's not a great view from here. We're behind Droit House. At the time it was built, we'd have been just across the way from the Ship Inn, which was a sort of 1960s, 70s flat-roofed pub, that kind of, which had a really bad reputation in the town as one of the rougher pubs in town. Why build it here? Why not by the station? Why not on the harbour arm? Why not in the middle of the old town? It's a fascinating place to choose to put it.
Yeah, there's a sort of quietness to it, isn't there? And there's a sort of modesty to it, which is surprising for a building that was designed as a gallery at that point where suddenly people are thinking about building structures that are rebranding a town. This idea that you have, your iconic building.
Yeah.
And the thing I really love about it is it's not that. It's not being an iconic building. It's actually just doing the job that it was designed for. It's a very subtle building. I guess the sad thing now is it's no longer doing the job that it was designed for because a lot of that stuff has moved into the gallery. What do you think should happen to this building now?
It needs some love. I mean, we can see looking at it, some of the laminate is starting to be chipped and come apart. And you can see a point in, 2 or 3 years' time when this starts to look really shabby and there's a problem to deal with. So it needs to be noticed now, which is part of the reason I brought you here, is because I want this building seen now before it, falls off a cliff. So I'd like to see this brought back into use as a gallery space. And that could be, in an ideal world, we'd write an Arts Council England bid, we'd get a pot of money, we'd be commissioning new work, as Turner did when they first had it. There were commissions in here, there's some brilliant pieces of work made specifically for this building. That would be the ideal. But if not, we have a huge number of studios and artists and makers in this town now. If not, it could just have a commercial basis as a gallery space that you rent by the week. And that would actually generate some income for the Visitor Information Centre at the front. You'd still come in the same way. You'd come in past their gift shop, but it would be back to its use. And I think people would look at it and start to fall in love with it again as a building because it's doing what it's supposed to do.
When I was in the boot and you were smashing your way over the Dartford crossing, heading towards Margate as a non-driver, I was being hit quite hard in the head by some large pottery objects. You're holding up a large pottery object, showing me that now. Yeah, one of them. What's that all about?
My other obsession is with teapots.
Your other obsession, like you've only got two.
Yeah, I've got a few, but I love teapots. I have over 100 teapots. The one I've selected, I've got a thermos and some Yorkshire tea bags, so we'll make a cup of tea while we're here.
Lovely.
But this one I like because it actually kind of looks a bit like the Terry Farrell building. It's a very squat little drum of a teapot. It's got a lovely really dark brown, almost black glaze, with a bit of decoration on the side, a bit of decoration on each side. What I love though is that people haven't started noticing yet how beautiful this British studio pottery from the 70s, 80s, 90s is. So I found this in a charity shop. I paid a couple of quid for this, and you can pick up a lot of this stuff in charity shops. Charity shops have started to notice that Portmeirion is collectible. Anything with a Hornsey label on the bottom, they'll try and fleece you for as much money as they can, whatever it is. But this studio pottery still sits there for a couple of quid because it's kind of lumpy brown stuff and nobody really wants it, or at least that's what they think. So I love the fact that you can find this stuff. It's beautiful, it's handmade, it's affordable, but it's the peak of craft. A good teapot has... all the things have to work for this to go well together. The handle has to be strong enough to hold it when it's full of water. You've got to be able to pour it without it dribbling too much when you pour. You don't want water running down the bottom of the spout. The lid has to stay on while you're pouring. There's nothing worse than a teapot that you tip and the lid falls off. The teapot's not got to be too heavy because you're filling it with water, it's going to get heavier. So you've got to make it with just enough clay in the first place. I love it. It's the combination of all these things coming together, and at the end of it, we get a bloody lovely cup of tea as well. I've been tracking studio potters in Thanet, on the Isle of Thanet, because we had a huge concentration.
When you say tracking,
I've been finding as many as I can, finding out which ones are still here, and I'm trying to buy something by every studio pottery that I can find that was in Thanet. So I have one of every pottery's work. And there were loads of them here, centred largely around Fairfield pottery. There was a guy called Brian Sutherland. He was the sort of master of glazes from natural materials. He wrote the book on pottery glazes made from local materials. And he had a pottery here. He was part of the kind of craft potters movement in the 60s and 70s. So he brought lots of other potters down here to work and run workshops and things as well. And I love the fact that you'd have been able to go to any town and there would have been a pottery. As I said, there's Fairfield pottery here, Broadstairs pottery. Lots of people collect Broadstairs pottery. Back in Worthing, there was Field Row pottery, where I used to go. And you could go in and you could buy a teapot. You could buy 3 or 4 different sizes of teapot. There'd be slightly variation of the design. But that potter had probably been in that studio making teapots for 10 or 12 years at least and, knew what he was doing. And so, yeah, they're not mass-produced. But on the other hand, I mean, Sidney Tustin, one of the great British studio potters, was known as the million pot potter because he'd made at least 1 million pots. So, he's not mass producing, but can turn this stuff out. I've done some work with Keith Brymer Jones and I've watched him make, he can easily make 100 mugs in a day. And we forget that this is how pottery used to be made. It's not ancient history that we relied on a Keith Brymer Jones making 100 mugs a day, so we all had a mug. And we've forgotten that this was an industry that worked quite well. And I get frustrated watching a lot of the new potters coming through who don't want to learn that skill. They want to make one-off things and it's sort of playing at being a potter. Because the real skill is, it's being able to take lump of clay and make the same pot, vase, mug over and over again. That's the skill.
The word that you use there, forgotten, I think that is a really interesting thing with the appeal of your teapot, is that it feels like there is a sort of forgotten skill in being able to do that, but also a forgotten appreciation of how good that skill is and how good the finished object is. That, both things seem to have slightly vanished.
Absolutely, yeah. And I almost don't want to talk about this because we're going to encourage people to go out and buy the pots in charity shops that I want to be buying.
You've got 100 already. What are you talking about? Where on earth are you going to move to with 100, 1,000 teapots?
There's always room for another one. But also, they're usable. I mean, that's the point of a teapot. It's got to work. We've got to be able to actually, there we are. Out the thermos, into the teapot, and now out into a mug.
I wish you wouldn't pour that on my head like that. It's very disconcerting. Teapots are just they're a lovely form, aren't they? They're a lovely shape and also usable. And that combination of sort of utility and beauty is so appealing, isn't it? To have something that is a gorgeous object to have in your house, but then also it's really useful. You could just use it every day.
Yeah, and they should be used. They're made to be used. They're not made to sit in a cabinet. We've got your Lucy Rise and your fancy studio potters who make art things. These are made to be in your kitchen and used. And if they get chipped or scuffed and you have to stick them back together, that's absolutely fine because that's them doing their job.
It is interesting what you were saying at the beginning about, there being a similarity between the form and the sort of colour of this and the building that you've chosen. Have you got a particular obsession with these sort of slightly stealthy circular objects? I mean, have you got like a collection of sort of flying saucers that you've captured somewhere else in the house?
No, I do like round things, and I think round architecture has always been interesting. I think round buildings are interesting. I worked on an archaeological dig in Worthing in 2008 as artist in residence on a dig, and we discovered Iron Age and Bronze Age roundhouses in the soil, and they show up as a circle of darker soil that shows the sort of outside of the structure. And my family come from Worthing. We've been in Worthing hundreds of years. We used to be shepherds on the South Downs. We've got a long Thompson history in Worthing. And we were part of the Strudwick family, who are a famous Sussex shepherding family. and to stand in the remains of a roundhouse, which was just up the road from the council estate I grew up on at the edge of Worthing, and to stand in the remains of this round building and to be able to see exactly where people had been. Round buildings are beautiful. They're human shaped. They're, we're not built for corners. We're built for round things.
Lovely. Well, on that inspiring note, there's only one thing we can do now, which is nip down to the beach and make a sandcastle version of the drum and also of the teapot. I think
Absolutely.
That's the only fitting thing to do. So thank you very much, Dan. It's been lovely talking to you. I might get the train back if that's all right. I'm still covered in bruises.
It might be less bumpy, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Dan.
Tell me the things that you loved before monstrosities born Amour.
You can find out more about Dan Thompson's work at mrdanThompson.wordpress.com. Allez, tu dois!